Ethan adjusted his camera strap, the weight of his equipment a familiar comfort against his chest. Colorado, he murmured, the name itself conjuring images of jagged peaks dusted in white. It was last year, a trip meticulously planned for an art project, a creative escape with his wife. Ariana, however, had other ideas. An avid skier, she'd charmed him into adding snowy slopes to their itinerary. The choice was simple, a bustling ski resort, or a private log cabin nestled deep in the mountains. Luxury wasn't the goal, romance was. Plus, he thought, calculating the budget, it's cheaper. They settled on the cabin. It was unassuming, to say the least. A single-story structure, barely 4 rooms, a snug 2-person bedroom, a compact living area, a tiny kitchen, and a shared bathroom. It lacked grandeur, but the very idea of it thrilled Ethan, secluded, warm, cradled by the impending blizzard they'd heard whispers of. It promised solitude, a blank canvas against the snow-laden sky. The storm arrived with breathtaking ferocity, fulfilling his romanticized vision. But as the hours passed and the snowfall intensified, its charm began to wane. It interfered relentlessly with the cable signal. One particular evening, boredom gnawed at them. The storm raged outside, but the light, though fading, still held a decent gleam. Perfect, Ethan thought, glancing at his camera. Blizzard backgrounds, maybe some atmospheric video. He told Ariana he'd be back in 10 minutes and pulled on his boots and coat. The moment he stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind him, a cold dread washed over him. In the snow that had already blown under the wooden awning above the front door, he saw distinct footprints. They led directly up to the door. Then, they doubled back, turning and heading off in the opposite direction. His blood ran cold. Freaked out was an understatement. His instinct was to run back inside, protect Ariana, but a surge of morbid curiosity held him frozen. He decided, against every sensible urge, to follow. The footprints were faint, lost in the powder for a moment, then reappearing, leading him around the right side of the cabin. His heart hammered against his ribs. Right where he expected them to end, they continued, converging on the window of their bedroom. His breath hitched. He could see Ariana inside, bathed in the faint light of her iPad, utterly oblivious. She was sitting on the bed, engrossed in whatever scrolled across the screen. She glanced towards the window, perhaps sensing the unusual stillness, and saw him. Ariana waved. He froze, his own wave suspended mid-air. The footprints continued, circling the cabin. Someone was stalking them. But from when? How long had they been there? He stood there, lost in a fog of indecision for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only a minute. Should he follow? The footprints now led away from the cabin, deeper into the dense, silent forest. The decision was made for him by an insatiable need to know. He followed the tracks, away from the safety of the log walls. The trees loomed, stark and skeletal against the bruised twilight sky. The snow crunched softly under his boots, each step echoing unnervingly in the still air. Then, he saw him. A figure in a black coat, slumped against a tree trunk, completely still, facing the rough bark as if studying it. He was motionless, a statue carved from the night, ignored even by the snow that began to settle undisturbed on his hood and shoulders. Ethan froze, his own breath visible in the cold air, a silent prayer not to be noticed. Normally, seeing someone in such a state might prompt a question, "Are you all right?" But this person radiated an unsettling wrongness, a vacant stillness that felt deeply disconcerting. He was just there. Like some deranged, silent specter. Instinct screamed louder than reason. Ethan began to backtrack slowly, deliberately making no sound, eyes glued to the figure, ensuring he didn't turn, didn't notice. When he felt a sufficient distance had put space between them, he turned and deliberately, forcefully, stamped through the snow back towards the cabin. He didn't knock. He slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing in the small, enclosed space. Ariana, startled, jumped from where she'd been reading on the sofa. Ethan? What was that? What's wrong? Her eyes, wide in the dim cabin light, immediately sought his, searching for the answer in his expression. She saw the fear, the worry mirrored in his own eyes. For several tense moments, he hesitated, unable to articulate the absurdity and horror of what he'd seen. But her gentle prodding, her increasing concern, finally broke him. He blurted it all out, the footprints, the figure in the black coat, staring blankly at a tree. Ariana didn't hesitate. She immediately started gathering her belongings, her movements sharp, urgent. We're leaving. Right now. But Ethan stopped her. No, we're not, he insisted, his voice trembling less from fear than from frustration. We paid for this. We're not just going to leave because some weirdo is wandering around outside. He'd be damned if he forfeited that deposit just because his imagination was running wild. Ariana argued, her voice tight with fear, but Ethan held firm. Reluctantly, she agreed, but made it clear she wasn't comfortable. She double-checked both locks on the cabin door, securing it as tightly as possible, then moved methodically around the cabin, ensuring every window was sealed shut, the curtains drawn tight against the encroaching night. Their evening activity dwindled to silence. They huddled on the sofa, their iPads the only light in the living room, the glow seeming feeble against the oppressive darkness outside. Ethan reviewed the photos and videos he'd taken earlier, the images of the snow-blurred landscape suddenly feeling ominous. The wind howled like a wild animal outside the cabin walls. Ethan, what if he's still out there? Ariana's whisper was barely audible, but it hung heavy in the air. He turned to face her, trying to project calm he didn't entirely feel. There's no way. It's freezing. And besides, he'd have to get through the locked door. He forced a reassuring smile, listening to the wind's relentless sigh and the occasional soft tap of snowflakes against the windows. In that strange, paradoxical way, the storm's fury had a strangely calming effect, lulling him into a false sense of security. He told himself he'd fall asleep easily. He didn't. He lay there, rigid with anxiety, straining his ears against the howling wind. Ariana, beside him, eventually drifted off, her breathing soft and even. The house seemed unnaturally silent, save for the wind's mournful song. Sleep wouldn't come, and then, it happened. A distinct knock on the bedroom window. Not the random tapping of a branch, but a sharp, deliberate knock made by a person. They were both instantly awake, hearts hammering, eyes wide with shared terror. It wasn't just him imagining things, she'd heard it too. There was no safe option left. They couldn't confront whoever was out there, and they couldn't stay. Weapons were non-existent, their cabin felt utterly defenseless. Their only hope was escape. The jeep, Ethan whispered, the plan forming instantly. Forget the luggage, we have to run. In the pitch darkness of the cabin, they fumbled for their boots and coats, the silence stretching agonizingly until they were both dressed. Waiting felt like a death sentence. The knock came again, louder this time at the living room window, right below their bedroom. It was definitely a person. Now! Ethan hissed, pushing Ariana towards the door. They didn't wait for the other knock. He fumbled for his keys, his fingers clumsy with panic. Finally, he pressed the unlock button. Relief flooded him, he'd chosen the remote lock option for his Wrangler. They scrambled outside, Ariana practically dragging him towards the car parked just a few yards away from the cabin's front door. They hopped in, slammed the doors shut, and Ethan fumbled for the ignition. The engine roared to life. He switched on the headlights, the sudden glare cutting through the snow-laden darkness. Just as the light flared, he saw it, the figure from earlier, the one he'd seen by the tree, now standing rigidly against the cabin's side wall, facing away, his body in the exact same slumped position. As if he were hiding his face from the light. Or perhaps, deliberately posing for them. It was a chilling final image before they drove away, leaving the isolated log cabin behind them in the blizzard. They found refuge at a nearby ski resort, their night spent in tense silence. The next morning, under clearer skies, they cautiously returned to the cabin to retrieve their belongings. He scanned the area, expecting to see the figure waiting, or perhaps find evidence of forced entry. But nothing. The footprints leading away from the cabin were now covered in fresh snow. The scene was unnervingly normal, save for the lingering trace of fear. He didn't see the man again. They packed what they could quickly and left, the incident a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of the world, even in the supposed safety of a log cabin. But the story didn't end there. Ethan's mind drifted back, years before, to another blizzard, another dark night, another terrifying encounter. He was 17, home alone, coincidentally on the night he first tried marijuana. He remembered sitting in his dimly lit room, a movie playing in the background, Mrs. Doubtfire, he thought, the familiar sounds blurred as he concentrated on the strange sensations building within him. He'd spent a good half-hour huffing from a pipe, trying to master the inhale, trying not to cough, yet feeling little effect. Finally, a subtle shift occurred. The air in the room seemed calmer. His senses felt heightened, yet dulled. He felt different. Excited, he wanted to explore this new feeling. Then, a sound. It cut through the muffled TV noise and his own altered state. He muted the television. It was faint, but distinct, a tapping, like light knocks, coming from downstairs, near the front door. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. Who would be knocking at his door in the middle of a dark, stormy December night? And why? His mind immediately jumped to his parents or sister, fearing they might return unexpectedly and somehow sense the illicit activity or smell the lingering smoke. Paranoia, fueled by the drug, surged. He crept downstairs, his heart pounding against his ribs, the familiar layout of the house suddenly feeling alien and menacing. He paused by the front door and peered through the peephole, his breath catching in his throat. On the other side of the frosted glass, stood a man. Severely underdressed for the freezing conditions, he looked almost homeless, his features obscured in the dim light filtering from the house. He wasn't someone Ethan recognized. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, not exactly isolated, but spread out. Houses were about 200 yards apart, a distance that felt vast on a dark, stormy night like this. This man, this complete stranger, standing on his porch, it was just wrong. Terrifying. His immediate, instinctual reaction? Pretend he wasn't home. He stayed pressed against the wall, his eyes glued to the peephole, watching the stranger. The man just stood there, unmoving for a moment, then raised a hand and knocked again, this time louder, more insistent. There was no way Ethan was answering that door. He couldn't. He slowly, silently backed away from the door, retreated up the stairs, and into the safety of his bedroom, pulling the door shut behind him. He didn't lock it. The house was old, the lock flimsy, but the closed door felt like a barrier. He sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the wind howl and the snow beat against the windows. A strange guilt mingled with his fear. He should let the man in, perhaps. But the instinct to protect himself and his home, the sheer terror of opening that door to a complete stranger on a dark, stormy night, was far stronger. He couldn't imagine what else the man could want, besides getting inside. He just didn't want him there. He wouldn't let him in. Time passed in a haze. He continued trying the pipe, the effects finally settling over him, but now tinged with a profound, creeping paranoia. The mind-wandering feeling he'd initially appreciated began to morph. He felt detached, floating, yet hyper-aware of every little sound. The room seemed to stretch, the shadows deepen. He drifted into a light sleep, or perhaps just a state of suspended terror, the clock ticking quietly on the wall. He awoke with a start, his eyes flying open, the clock glowing 1:04 a.m. He hadn't been asleep long. Maybe 20 minutes. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the fog, trying to place the memory of the stranger at the door. It felt distant now, unreal. Then, he heard it. A sound from downstairs, in the den. A faint, scratching sound? Or was it something else? He sat up, his heart instantly pounding again. He remembered the man. The fear was back, a cold knot in his stomach. He was about to leap out of bed, make a run for it, when his eyes landed on something across the room, something he hadn't noticed before in the dim, half-light. Beyond the slightly ajar bedroom door, there was a dark shape. He leaned forward, straining his eyes, focusing. Someone was there, just beyond the door, peering into the bedroom. A silhouette, huddled. He let out a strangled gasp, a raw, gut-wrenching scream of pure terror that tore from his throat as the figure began to move, slowly emerging from the shadows of the doorway, stepping towards the bed. He didn't think, he just reacted. With a strength born of sheer terror, he shoved the figure back, sending it tumbling onto the floor. He scrambled backwards, away from the figure on the floor, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. He saw it now, a man, incredibly thin, almost frail, clutching at his arm where Ethan had shoved him. The man tried to fight, to push himself up, but his movements were weak, clumsy. Ethan, fueled by panic and adrenaline, shoved again, harder this time, propelling the thin figure towards the front door. The man stumbled, still trying weakly to resist, but he was no match. Ethan shoved him towards the door, fumbled with the locks, and slammed it shut, the heavy sound echoing through the tense silence. He locked it, perhaps twice, his fingers trembling. He didn't hesitate. He snatched his phone, dialed 911, his voice trembling but clear as he explained the situation to the dispatcher. He stayed in the dark hallway, his back pressed against the wall opposite the front door where the glass had been shattered. No, he hadn't broken the window, it was already shattered. The man wasn't in the bushes outside, he was inside, and he'd gotten in somehow. The police arrived quickly. They found the thin man huddled in the front bushes outside, shivering, curled into a tight ball. They took him away without a word, leaving Ethan standing in the wreckage of his night, his childhood home, suddenly feeling like a dangerous stranger. So, did he feel bad about it? Looking back years later, yes, perhaps a little. The man was undoubtedly disturbed, maybe even mentally ill, judging by the vacant look Ethan recalled in his eyes. But was he dangerous? Ethan couldn't be sure. He'd acted purely on instinct, a primal urge to survive. It was the scariest experience of his life, and it left a bitter, unsettling taste in his mouth. That fear, that paranoia, felt strangely familiar. It surfaced again years later, when he was just 13, during another blizzard. Him and his friends, they were reckless back then, invincible. They'd invented a game called Manhunt, playing it every chance they got, especially in the snow. This particular January night, the blizzard was raging, visibility near zero. 6 of them were playing, divided into 2 teams of 3. The objective was simple: hide, then run to the designated safe point, the front stoop of the biggest, oldest house on their street. The snow made perfect hiding spots, slowed down chasers, and even snowballs became legitimate weapons. They'd been playing for hours, freezing, exhilarated. Ethan, along with his friends Dan and Christian, were on one team. Dan, always the quickest, hopped the fence into the backyard of the house across the street. Christian, inventive, climbed onto the small shed in their own backyard and hid behind the sloped roof, blending in with the shadows. Ethan, wanting to throw off any trackers, ran around the backyard, creating a confusing, seemingly endless trail of footprints in the fresh snow. Suddenly, his teammates' shouts rang out, announcing their approach from the other side of the house. Ethan had to think fast. He signaled urgently to Christian, pointing towards the roof, silently commanding him to run. Then, Ethan ducked into the bushes by the back fence and lay flat, pressing himself into the snow. He heard footsteps crunching on the snow behind him. 2 figures entered the backyard, their breath misting in the cold air as they began analyzing the deliberately confusing trail he'd left. Ethan held his breath, waiting. They were getting closer, circling towards the bushes where he lay hidden. He gave the signal. Christian, watching from his perch on the shed roof, leaped down into the snow and sprinted towards the front lawn, drawing the pursuers away. The 2 chasers split up, one going towards the front of the house, the other following Christian towards the street. Ethan knew the direct path to the front stoop was now clear. He waited just a second longer, then sprang up, following Christian's path towards the front, ready to make a dash for the safety of the stoop. But as he hopped onto the shed roof, glancing back towards the backyard where Dan had gone, he saw something that froze his blood. He looked for Dan's footprints, expecting to see them leading towards the back fence gate, but they didn't. Instead, near the fence where Dan must have landed, the clear prints of his boots faded. They didn't lead out of the yard. Instead, they transformed into a strange, steady trail of something being dragged through the deep snow. Following the faint imprints, his heart sank as he saw where they led, straight to the back door of the sprawling, dark, old house next door, and then, they stopped. He'd known that old house at the end of their block was abandoned, had been for years. It was never truly empty, people said. There were always rumors, whispers among the older neighbors about strange occurrences, about vagrants sometimes taking shelter there. But seeing the distinct trail of his friend's footprints ending at that house in the dead of night, his mind raced, connecting the dots. Dan wasn't coming back. He was in there. Ethan's blood ran cold. His first instinct was to run, to find his parents, but reason flickered. He had to know. He had to get help. He turned and headed back towards the fence, intending to hop over and run down the block to alert his friend's parents, who lived nearby. He made it halfway across the yard, the snow muffling his steps, his mind racing with frantic plans, when he heard it. The unmistakable slide of a back door being opened. From the dark house next door, a figure, silhouetted against the faint light filtering from the house's interior, emerged. A heavy black coat swallowed the figure, the hood pulled so tight it obscured the face. The figure didn't move towards the house. Instead, it began stomping deliberately through the snow, directly towards Ethan. Ethan let out a strangled scream, pure terror stripping away any rational thought. He scrambled backwards, then turned and bolted, throwing himself over the fence just as a strong hand reached for his ankle. He landed hard on the other side, scrambling to his feet, not daring to look back. He ran, his lungs burning, until he saw the lights of his friend's parents' house. He pounded on the door, breathless, telling them what he'd seen, what he feared. His friend's father, a man usually calm and collected, grabbed a shotgun. The friend's father, stormed over to the old house, Ethan and his friends trailing anxiously behind, staying clear of the property. He didn't hesitate, just knocked loudly on the front door. There was no answer. He waited a moment, then knocked again, harder. Still nothing. With a sigh, the father unlocked the old, creaky door himself. They waited outside, the wind howling, the snow falling heavily, as minutes ticked by. Then, the father emerged, hauling Dan behind him. Dan's face was bruised, red, looking like he'd been hit hard, perhaps by a heavy branch or shovel in the dark. He was unconscious, slumped against his father, his clothes torn, his breath ragged in the cold air. He'd somehow survived being dragged into that old, dark house. They never found out who, or what, had taken Dan. The man in the black coat was never seen again, nor was he ever reported to the police, at least not by them. Whether he was the perpetrator or just someone else caught in the storm remains unknown. But Dan's story, and the chilling memory of that figure emerging from the darkness, was always there in the back of Ethan's mind, a stark reminder of the predators that could lurk, not just in the shadows, but right next door, waiting for the opportunity to strike. And sometimes, the shadows were closer than you think.